Hello and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 189, where our mission is to bring God's Word to God's world. I'm Andrew Flack, our Student Ministries Director, and today I'll be giving you a nugget of encouragement and Bible knowledge while Pastor Bob is taking a much-needed vacation. So we've been talking about name changes in the Bible because our names are what we title things that have specific meaning, right? In the Bible, everything, whether it's a location, whether it's a person, anything, when it's named, it's always their literal definition that explains what it is, right? A simple example is Adam really just means man. So rather than us thinking of it as, oh, that's his name, it's also like, it's literal. He is a man. That is why he is called Adam, right? But in Western society, we're pretty removed from that. For example, my name is Andrew, which means warrior, and if you can tell on the camera, I'm not warrior material, right? And that's obviously not where I am with it. Another example is Starbucks coffee. In 1971, one of the co-founders of Starbucks was a writer, and he really liked the book Moby Dick, and they were going to call it Pequod, after the ship in the book, but they were like, who wants a cup of coffee from a place called Pequod? So long story short, they found a place on a map called Starbucks, and they were like, oh wait, the first mate of Pequod was called Starbuck, so we'll put an S on it, and Starbucks coffee is now the name of it. And it's like, what? That is so convoluted and unnecessary when you could just be like, oh, Chick-fil-A, they sell chicken fillets. Like it is what it is, which is so consistent, right? But we're removed from this idea of defining things and naming things for exactly what they mean. But that's how naming works in the Bible. So today we're going to kind of talk about the naming that Jesus gives to Simon, which is Peter. And first I wanted to start by saying that he doesn't necessarily change his name, right? He still kind of always goes by Simon and Peter, right? He owns Peter the more that he dives into his relationship with Jesus. But Jesus himself still also calls him Simon, and Peter can be kind of looked at as a nickname that is kind of given to him at their first meeting. So in John chapter 1, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, he introduces Simon to Jesus, right? And it's kind of implied that Andrew was already in with John the Baptist, like he was getting into this progressive revolutionary moment in history, right? And Peter maybe wasn't so involved. All this was kind of new to him, and Andrew was kind of dragging him along like, hey, you've got to meet this person. I think this is the Christ we've been waiting for. So Simon meets Jesus, and this is when Jesus says, it says, when Jesus saw him, he said, you are Simon, son of John, right? He calls him by his name. But then he says, you will be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. How weird is that? If I met someone for the first time, I said, hey, my name's Andrew, and they said, no, your name is Cephas, which means Peter, I would be like, huh? Like, what do you mean by that? How bold is it to meet somebody and tell them, no, your name is this instead of this, right? But remember that naming in the Bible means something, right? And Cephas, or Peter, is actually translated to the word rock. Now, this doesn't really give you any more information to go off of. If someone said, no, you're not Andrew, you are rock, I'd be like, what? Like the rock? Like what does that even mean? And what I want you to notice here is that at the moment that Peter met Jesus, Jesus had an idea and he knew what Simon Peter would go on to do. He knew why he was calling him rock, but Simon didn't. Because in Matthew 16, this is after the feeding of the 4,000. This is after all the rest of the disciples had been chosen. There's been a lot of time between Jesus' first interaction calling Simon Peter and then now. And he's still owning this name, not having a clue as to why Jesus keeps calling him rock. But in Matthew 16, Jesus asked the question to his disciples in verse 13, who do people say that the Son of Man is? It says they replied, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. Jesus is like, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And the way that this reads, I imagine an awkward pause here. Like they're all like, well, we've been following this guy for a long time and we're not even entirely sure like who he is or what this is about. But in verse 16, Peter answers, right? He jumps in. He says, "You, Jesus, are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responds with this, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father did in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven." Then he told the disciples to tell no one that he was the Messiah. So what I want you to notice here is that it wasn't until Peter acknowledged who Jesus was and why it's important to his life that God revealed to him who he really is and what it is that he will do. Right? But it also wasn't totally explained to Peter. He just got a new glimpse of his future, right? If someone told me, "Oh, you are Andrew, and on this rock I will build my church," like, I'm not clear on exactly what that even means, but it gives me a little bit more direction. So if you are confused about like what it is that your life's work is, or what your life's work was, or what you can do with your life, don't be so caught up in the things of the future and the things of the past and getting so caught up in these things, because Jesus tells us to not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about himself. And that if we can just define who Jesus is, wake up every day and say, "Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You are the one who can help us to be the person that we were designed to be," then every day we'll step closer and closer to the purpose that God has designed for us. And Peter understands this, right? Because we see his status change as this nickname is further defined for him, right? He reaches a heavy status in Acts, to the point where people were saying, "Man, if only Peter would walk by me, his shadow would touch me and I'd be healed," right? Like, he had this remarkable status, and it was because he was more close to Jesus and more in touch with him. Not because of all the things that he did in his life, not because of all the things that he succeeded in, right? But because his truth, his purpose was just in knowing Jesus more and knowing that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that understanding is the thing that drove him to continue on. That his life was not defined by exactly what it is that he did and didn't do, but his life was defined by being a faithful servant to Jesus Christ. And I wanted to leave you with this, because as Peter continues in his journey, he even writes some letters of his own. And I think from it, it really reveals how well he understood this title, rock, and what it means. It's in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 5. This is what he says. "As you come to Jesus as a living stone, rejected by people, but chosen and honored by God, you yourselves as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." You see, Peter gets that we are all just stones being part of this large building of a spiritual house, or the kingdom, or God's government, or his holy priesthood, that we are all pieces to that, and that if we want to know what our purpose is, and if we want to know what it is that we are going to do in our lives, that it's just in defining God as the living God, Jesus as the Son of the living God, who's our Messiah, and asking him what it is that he would have us do, that we're just grateful to be another faithful servant to him, who is a part of the building of something that we don't even know what it is, but he does, and that's what matters. So I encourage you to take Peter's word for it and to view yourself as one of these living stones, to be someone who is a part of a whole that God is working into the earth, and to help advance the kingdom on the earth in this new year. Thank you.